Snow drifted across the empty station platform, carried by a wind that howled like some hungry thing searching for shelter. The sun had already dipped behind the ridges, leaving the land washed in a pale gold that could not warm a soul. The train was long gone, its whistle a memory fading into the plains. Only two figures remained under the creaking wooden awning, a weary cowboy widower with dust on his boots, and a woman clutching a small leather bag, her eyes filled with something between pride and heartbreak. He hadn't meant to stop at the station that day. His mule cart had broken a wheel just down the road, and he'd come walking up the hill in search of help. What he found instead was a woman sitting alone on a bench, her hands folded tight, her bonnet shadowing a face marked by time and quiet endurance. The ticket clerk had already gone home. The porter had shrugged when asked why she stayed. Some mail-order bride, he muttered, left behind when her man saw her age and changed his mind. The cowboy had seen many things in his life: drought, death, betrayal. But few sights hit him quite like that woman waiting with no one coming for her. Her small figure, her trembling lips that refused to show weakness, the way her eyes darted toward every distant sound as if hoping a rider might appear. She didn't look broken, but she looked finished, like someone who'd come to the end of all roads and still chose to sit up straight. He stood there for a long moment, unsure why he didn't just walk away. He wasn't the saving kind. Since losing his wife 2 winters ago, he'd built fences and fixed roofs and talked to no one. The ranch was quiet, his cattle few, and the house colder than the wind itself. He didn't even light the stove some nights, saying to himself it wasn't worth the bother. But something about that woman's stillness pulled him closer. When he spoke, his voice came out rough, more like a cough than a word. "You waiting on someone, ma'am?" She turned her head, eyes pale gray beneath the bonnet. "I was," she answered softly. "But the man I came for changed his mind." The cowboy nodded slowly. He didn't know what to say to that. Out here, hearts got broken in quiet ways. Folks didn't cry much. They just carried on until they couldn't. He wanted to ask where she'd go now, but from the look on her face, she didn't have an answer. "Train won't come back till morning," he said finally. "Ain't safe to stay out here alone." "I know," she said, her voice calm but thin. "But I've nowhere else to go." He rubbed the back of his neck, feeling the wind bite through his jacket. The lamps were being snuffed out one by one down the street. The last wagon had already passed. The station master's dog barked once, then went silent. "Got a little place few miles from here," he muttered. "You could rest there for the night. Nothing fancy, but it's dry and warm." She hesitated, her hands tightening on the bag. "I wouldn't want to trouble you." "Wouldn't offer if it was trouble," he said simply. And so she followed him down the dusty road, her boots crunching softly behind his. The night grew darker, and the stars came out sharp as broken glass. Neither spoke much on the way. He carried her bag without being asked, and she walked a step behind, quiet as a prayer that had lost its words. When they reached his ranch, she stopped at the fence and stared. The place wasn't much: a crooked barn, a small house with smoke barely rising from the chimney. But it was home to someone, and that seemed to matter to her. She stood there a while before saying, "Your wife must have kept it lovely." He looked away toward the hills. "She did. Used to hang flowers in the windows every spring." The woman smiled faintly, though sadness lingered in her eyes. "Then she must have loved it here." "She did," he said again. And for the first time in months, he felt the weight of his own loneliness settle heavier than before. Inside, he lit a lamp and set a chair by the fire. She sat down, folding her hands neatly in her lap. He poured her some coffee, though it had gone bitter on the stove. She drank it without complaint. Her face looked softer in the firelight, showing lines of both struggle and strength. There was no paint, no showiness, just a calm dignity that time couldn't take away. He asked her name, and she told him in a low voice. Then she asked his, and when he said it, she repeated it gently, as though tasting the sound for comfort. "You said you were coming to marry a man?" he asked after a while. She nodded, her gaze fixed on the flame. "We'd exchanged letters for near half a year. He said he didn't care about my age, only my heart. But when he saw me, he looked once and walked away without a word. He didn't know what to reply, so he just poked the fire." Outside, the wind picked up, moaning against the walls. Inside, it felt like time itself had stopped moving. After a long silence, she spoke again. "I suppose I'll try to find work in town, maybe at the laundry or boarding house. Though I'm not sure they'd take someone my age." He leaned back in his chair, staring at her across the flickering light. He thought about the empty house, the empty mornings, The meals eaten without a sound. He thought about how long it had been since anyone had spoken to him kindly. "You came here for a husband," he said finally. "Suppose you still want one?" She blinked, startled. "You mean?" "I mean I ain't much," he interrupted, his voice low but steady. "Just a rancher trying to keep things running, but I could use someone who don't mind hard work. Someone who don't spook easy. We could go into town tomorrow, see the preacher." The fire crackled between them. She stared at him, eyes searching his face for a joke or a lie. But there was none, only a tired sincerity worn like his boots. "I don't even have a wedding dress," she whispered. He gave a small shrug. "Don't reckon that matters. I didn't have one last time either." The woman's hands trembled slightly as she set down her cup. "You barely know me." "Don't need to," he said. "Sometimes folks just know what's right when it's standing in front of them." The words hung in the air, thick with both hope and fear. Outside, coyotes cried in the distance, and the cold crept closer through the cracks. She looked down at her hands, then back at the man sitting across the fire. His eyes were tired but honest, his face rough yet kind. "I'm too old for dreams," she said softly. "Maybe," he said. "But maybe dreams don't care much about age." Neither spoke after that. The fire burned lower, and somewhere deep inside both of them, something long asleep began to stir. The idea of two broken lives finding purpose again felt impossible, yet strangely near. By morning, the sky turned pink over the hills, and the first birds began to sing. The woman stood by the window, watching the light stretch across the land. She felt different, nervous, uncertain, yet alive. The man saddled his horse in silence, glancing toward the house every few minutes. When he came back inside, she turned to him with a faint smile. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. He nodded once. "I reckon I am." Then he offered his hand. She looked at it for a moment before taking it slowly, as if stepping toward a cliff's edge and trusting the air to hold her. Together they walked out into the crisp morning, the trail stretching ahead toward town and whatever fate waited there. As the wind carried the sound of their footsteps away, the lonely station miles behind them stood quiet once more. Somewhere between two strangers and one promise, a new story had begun, one the whole town would talk about for years to come. Yet neither of them knew that before the sun would set again, that quiet wedding day would bring a storm neither was ready for, and the promise made that morning would soon be tested in ways they never imagined. The road into town stretched long and quiet that morning, the sun still low enough to paint everything gold. The man rode beside the woman, his hat pulled low, his horse keeping an easy pace with the wagon. She sat upright, hands folded neatly on her lap, a borrowed shawl draped over her shoulders. There was a nervous calm between them, the kind that comes when two people walk towards something unknown but necessary. The town itself was just waking up, smoke rising from chimneys, a few shopkeepers sweeping their steps, dogs trotting after wagons. When the pair arrived, people paused to stare. A stranger was no news, but a woman her age stepping off a rancher's wagon with travel dust still on her skirts made talk start early. He helped her down without saying much, only nodding once toward the church across the street. The old preacher, a thin man with kind eyes, met them at the door, surprised to see anyone so early. The cowboy explained their wish in short words, not looking up much while he spoke. The preacher's brow lifted slightly, but he didn't question them. He'd seen enough hard times to know some unions were made out of need as much as love. The vows were said quick and plain, the way country folks preferred. Her voice trembled when she spoke, but she looked straight into his eyes. His voice was steady though quiet. No music, no flowers, just two souls trying to build something out of loneliness. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, she gave a small, almost shy nod, and he touched the brim of his hat in place of a kiss. The witnesses were a young stable hand and the preacher's wife, both smiling kindly though curious. Within an hour, the two were headed back down the same dusty road, married as simply as they had met. The ranch looked different to her now that she rode toward it as someone's wife. She noticed the way the fence leaned, the way the grass grew wild near the barn door, the tired boards on the porch that creaked under every step. Yet she also saw the quiet beauty of it, the open hills stretching far as the eye could see, the cottonwoods whispering near the creek, the smell of horses and sun-dried hay. It wasn't much, but it was alive. When they reached home, he helped her down and stood back awkwardly, as if unsure what came next. "You can take the room on the left," he said finally. "My wife used to keep it tidy. Still smells of her lavender, I think." She nodded gently, understanding more than he said. Inside, the house held both warmth and emptiness. There were little traces of the woman who came before: embroidered curtains, a painted plate on the wall, a faded scarf hanging behind the door. She ran her fingers along the table, feeling the dust gather there, and for a moment she wondered what kind of woman had once filled this home with laughter. He busied himself in the barn most of the day, mending tools that didn't need fixing. He wasn't a man used to company anymore. Every sound inside the house, her footsteps, the kettle's whistle, the faint hum of her voice, reminded him that he'd opened a door he wasn't sure he could keep open. Still, when he came in for supper, the smell of stew greeted him, and for the first time in months the kitchen light looked welcoming. They ate quietly at first, both unsure how to speak to each other. She asked about the cattle, about how far the nearest town was, about the weather on these plains come winter. He answered in short phrases, but she didn't seem to mind. Her voice had a calm steadiness that filled the silence rather than broke it. After a while, he asked about her journey, and she told him pieces of it, how she'd come from the east by train, how the days had felt longer than weeks, and how she'd carried a photograph of the man she was, supposed to marry until the moment he turned away at the station. Guess he wasn't made for keeping promises, the cowboy said. Maybe not, she replied quietly, but I came here believing there was still good in men. I'd rather keep believing that, he didn't answer. He just looked at her a moment, then stood to fetch more firewood. Something about her words lingered, though, softening the rough corners inside him that he'd let grow sharp for too long. Days turned into a slow rhythm. She mended curtains, scrubbed the floors, and tended a small patch of earth near the porch where she planted seeds she'd brought in a small tin from back home. He worked the land, rising before dawn, driving cattle out to the ridge. In the evenings they shared simple meals and quiet talk, slowly learning the sound of each other's silences. Yet underneath that peace, something uneasy began to stir. It started with the letters. One morning when she went to sweep the front room, she found an envelope tucked beneath a stack of old newspapers. It was yellowed and torn, addressed in a delicate hand. She didn't open it, of course, but when she handed it to him, she saw his face change. He took it without a word, shoved it into his coat pocket, and went out to the barn. For the rest of the day he hardly spoke. That night, he didn't touch his supper. She didn't ask about it again, though curiosity burned quietly inside her. In the days that followed, she noticed other things: photographs turned face down on the mantel, a small locket kept in the drawer, a woman's shawl still folded neatly on the bed in the room across the hall. It was clear the shadow of the past still lived here, and she wasn't sure if she was meant to share the same roof with it or slowly push it away. One evening, as they sat by the fire, a storm rolled in, fierce and sudden. Rain lashed the windows and thunder shook the rafters. When a loud crack split the night, the lantern flickered and went out. She gasped softly, but before she could move, he was beside her with another lamp shielding the flame with his hand. "Don't be afraid," he said, his voice low. "I'm not," she replied, though her heart raced. "It just feels like the sky's coming down." He gave a faint smile. "Out here storms come fast and leave faster. You get used to it." But that night, long after the rain stopped, he sat awake by the window, staring toward the hills. She could see his silhouette in the faint glow of the dying fire, shoulders heavy with thoughts he never shared. When she asked him quietly if something was wrong, he said only, "Nothing you need to worry about." By late summer, the townsfolk had begun whispering about them. Some said he'd married her out of pity, others said out of need. A few claimed it was because he couldn't stand the quiet anymore. She heard the talk when she went to town for supplies, though she pretended not to. It didn't hurt her pride as much as she expected. It just made her wonder what kind of man he truly was beneath all that silence. One afternoon, while gathering laundry from the line, she saw him riding hard from the south pasture, dust rising behind his horse. He looked pale, shaken. "Someone cut the fence," he said when he reached her. "And a steer's gone missing," she frowned. "Could it be rustlers?" "Maybe," he said, glancing toward the horizon. "But it ain't the first time. Found hoofprints last week, too." That night he sat cleaning his rifle by the fire. She sat across from him sewing a torn sleeve, pretending not to notice the worry etched across his face. Something was happening out there on the land, something he didn't want to speak of yet. Later, when she went to hang his coat by the door, another letter fell from the pocket. She bent to pick it up, and before she could hand it back, her eyes caught the faint ink scrawled across the paper. It was from a woman. The handwriting was the same as before, He turned suddenly, seeing it in her hand. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he reached out and took it, his jaw tight. "It's nothing," he said, though his tone betrayed him. She nodded slowly, setting the coat aside. "Sometimes nothing carries a lot of weight," she murmured. He didn't answer. The wind howled outside again, shaking the windows like some old ghost trying to come in. That night she lay awake, listening to the restless creak of the house, wondering what kind of truth he was keeping locked inside. She didn't regret marrying him. Loneliness had brought them together, yes, but kindness had begun to hold them there. Still, the letters, the missing cattle, the distant look in his eyes, all of it whispered that there was more beneath the surface of this quiet life than she'd been told. As the moonlight slipped through the cracks of the shutters, she turned to look at the man sleeping in the next room. He seemed calm, but his hand rested close to the rifle beside the bed. In that moment, she understood that whatever peace she'd found here was fragile. Something was coming, something that would test both of them, and though she didn't know it yet, before the next harvest, the truth hidden in those letters and the reason behind the cut fences would change everything between them forever. The next morning, the ranch woke under a thin veil of mist. The woman stepped onto the porch with a pail, listening to the creek's soft chatter and the restless groan of the barn boards. She checked the garden rows she had planted and found 2 neat tracks in the damp soil, as if someone had stood there in the night and watched the door. Her chest tightened. She called out and he came from the corral, rope in hand, eyes narrowing at the sight. He bent to study the tracks, then looked up at the line of cottonwoods along the creek. He said nothing, only walked to the shed and came back with fresh nails and wire. That day he reinforced every latch and hinge as if the wind itself had turned hostile. In town, the talk had thickened. At the feed store, a few men joked that the new wife must be more housekeeper than bride, that a cowboy widower needed help more than love. She kept her head down and counted the brown sugar and flour in her basket, yet every word settled like grit under her skin. She paid the bill and thanked the clerk, then paused at the door. Across the street, the old preacher stood with a stack of hymn sheets, giving a small nod. His wife waved her over for warm bread. For a moment, the woman felt the comfort of being seen without judgment, though it faded when a rider cantered past and tipped his hat with a smirk that did not reach his eyes. Back at the ranch, the man found the north fence cut again. He followed the trail alone, pushing through sage and low grass until he reached a shallow wash where hoofprints crossed and dissolved. He waited there, listening. A meadowlark trilled, then fell silent. He felt watched. The rifle across his back shifted, and he loosened it without drawing. He was not afraid of a fight, only of what a fight would cost. The herd was small. One bad season or a handful of stolen cattle could sink the place for good. That night she warmed stew and set out 2 bowls. He came in late, dust on his boots and worry in his eyes. She asked if it was only cattle thieves or something else. He hesitated, then said the missing steer had been driven in a smart way, not random. Someone who knew the land. She set down a loaf of bread and told him about the tracks by the garden. He went quiet, then reached across the table and closed his hand gently over hers. They sat like that for a long time, neither moving, the old clock ticking slow as a heartbeat. The next day, the stable hand from the church rode out with a message from the sheriff. There had been other reports of cut fences along the valley. The sheriff wanted the ranchers to meet at the schoolhouse. The woman brewed coffee for the boy and wrapped a spare sandwich for the road. He thanked her, then asked how she liked married life. She smiled thinly and said it was honest work. The boy's eyes softened. He leaned closer and said some people in town were starting to wonder if the rustlers had help from inside. He looked ashamed as soon as he said it, as if the words were not his but the town's. At the schoolhouse, the men gathered under a ceiling stained with smoke and time. The chalkboard listed letters for children who would not sit there until week's end. The sheriff was a steady man with a slow voice who asked more questions than he answered. He opened a worn ledger, logged the losses, and drew a rough map pointing to gaps along the valley. The pattern was careful, almost polite, never taking too much from one place, never enough to provoke a chase that would last more than a morning. The sheriff said the thieves had a hand in town or a friend who knew the rancher's hours. Eyes slid toward the livery, the saloon, the freight yard. A merchant cleared his throat, claiming he had seen 3 riderless horses moving at dusk near the old ore road. No one spoke the name that hovered over the room like smoke. From her side of the story, the woman worked on chores that felt like weaving a safety net. She scrubbed windows until the rooms caught the light again. She found the old lavender tucked in a drawer and mixed it with fresh water, setting a small jar on the table for calm. She wrote a list for winter stores and pinned it near the stove. She took in the hem of a dress that had belonged to the woman who came before her, turning it into an apron that fit her own frame. As she stitched, she told herself she was not replacing a soul, only giving the house a living breath again. In the afternoons, she walked to the creek to rinse clothes. There she met the woman from the boarding house who visited the ranch once a month to sell milk and butter. The boarding house woman spoke with a quick, sharp voice, yet there was kindness behind it. She warned that a new buyer had been paying cash for beef in a town beyond the ridge. Good money, no questions. She said the buyer sent word through a car dealer who drank his wages by sundown. The woman from the ranch listened and asked for a name. The boarding house woman shook her head. Saying names out loud had a way of turning talk into trouble. The letters returned. He left a drawer slightly open by mistake, and she saw 3 envelopes, each with the same careful hand. She did not pry, but that night she asked if they were from family. He said no. She asked if they were from someone to whom he owed a debt. He looked away and said in a manner of speaking. She waited, counting her own breaths. He finally told her the writer was the sister of his first wife. She had never forgiven him for taking her west. The sister claimed he had dragged a gentle woman into a hard life that broke her. The letters came each season and cut him in places the eye could not see. He burned the first 2. He kept the others as if pain was a ledger he had to balance. The woman set her hand on his arm and told him grief tightens like a knot when you try to hide it. He nodded, then stood and put more wood on the fire. She knew there was more and chose not to push. He would speak when he could. A subplot began in the quiet space between chores. A small gray mare had given birth early, and the foal walked with a limp. The woman took to the foal with a patience that seemed bottomless. Each day she rubbed its leg with warm cloth and coaxed it to the water. The man watched from a distance, surprised by the strength in her. He had married her for reasons even he could not name that morning at the church. Now he saw she had a way of holding broken things without turning away. He wondered if that included a man with too many regrets. Trouble deepened. 2 cows were found dead near the creek, not taken, only left as a warning. The cuts were clean. The message was simple as a brand. Keep your head down or lose more. The sheriff rode out again, his brow heavy, and asked for patience while he gathered proof. Patience was a fine word for town. On a ranch it meant you kept moving even while your gut twisted. A second subplot pushed its way into the house. The preacher's wife sent word that she was starting a class for girls who worked at the laundry and the cafe, teaching them letters at night. She asked if the woman at the ranch would help with reading. The woman agreed. One evening each week she hitched the mare and drove to town with a lantern wrapped in a cloth. She read out loud from old books while the girls sounded out terms like homestead and freeholder and prairie. The woman did not speak about her own past, yet the girls watched her with a look that mixed hope and caution. They liked that she carried herself without apology. On one of those nights, the card dealer from the saloon slipped into the back of the schoolhouse and listened behind the door. The woman sensed a shadow and paused, then picked up the next line as if nothing had happened. When class ended, she stepped into the alley and saw the dealer lighting a cigarette, his smile thin. He asked if the cowboy widower knew where she went after dark. She said yes. He asked if the house was ever left empty. She said no. His smile cooled. He tipped his hat, then let the match burn down to his fingers without flinching. The man had his own angle pulling at him. A notice from the bank arrived by Ryder. The winter storm after his first wife passed had taken half the herd, and the note he had carried forward was coming due before harvest. The banker was civil but clear. The ranch needed a good sale or a partner. The man folded the notice and placed it under the same paperweight that held the letters from the past. He did not tell his wife that night, choosing instead to sit with her in the doorway and talk about the color the evening. Sky turned when the sun slid into the hills. The sheriff's slow hunt turned up a horseshoe with a chipped edge that matched tracks found along the wash. The blacksmith said he had shod 3 horses with that pattern last month, all from out of town, all paid by the card dealer. The sheriff went to ask questions and returned with a split lip and nothing on paper. He warned the ranchers to keep their lanterns filled and their rifles oiled. He warned the women to pair up when coming to evening service. He warned the boys at the freight yard to stop talking big, because big talk could get a body killed. No one slept easy after that. From the woman's view, the house grew smaller as the night grew larger. She kept a lamp by the window and a kettle ready, as if hot water could chase away fear. The foal's limp improved and became a small mercy she held close. She began leaving short notes on the table when she went to town, stating her errand and return time, not because he asked for them, but because it soothed her to write a promise and then keep it. She kept an ear out for the soft creak of the gate that did not come from wind. The man began riding the ridge after dark, not to play hero, but to let whoever watched know the ranch would not be taken without noise. He circled wide, moved quiet, and never rode the same path twice. He saw flashes of light far off, not stars, not fireflies, but signals, and his jaw locked. The rustlers were talking in a code older than this valley. He knew he had to cut the cord between town and hills, or the ranch would not stand. One late afternoon, the boarding house woman arrived with a basket and an urgent whisper. The card dealer had been paid to sit near the telegraph and watch who sent messages. A name had been spoken in the back room of the saloon, not loud but loud enough. A cattle buyer from the other side of the ridge called himself a partner to a man right here. The boarding house woman would not repeat the name, only glanced toward the livery where a shadow moved behind a stall. Clouds built like a wall over the western line. The man saddled fast and told his wife he had to ride to the schoolhouse and speak to the sheriff before dark. She wanted to go too, but he asked her to stay and keep the lamps high. He pressed her hand against his chest, as if asking her to hold the beat steady until he returned. She nodded and watched him disappear into the first drops of rain. The wind rose. The garden bent under it. The woman brought in the wash and checked each window latch twice. The foal cried in the barn and she went to stroke its neck, feeling the animal's small heart race under her palm. She heard a faint ring from the front gate, then silence. When she stepped back onto the porch, the rain had turned cold. She stood there listening. A shape moved near the cottonwoods and then stilled. She could not tell if it was man or branch, until the lightning drew a white line across the sky and showed a hat brim, then a second behind it. She crossed the room and lifted the rifle the man kept by the door, the weight strange yet steady in her hands. She thought of the girls at the night class, of the man who had asked her to believe without promise of ease, of the house built by another woman's hands, and now warmed by her breath. She set her feet and took aim at the dark that waited under the trees. Far off, the thunder carried another sound within it, a second rhythm like hooves at a dead run. The man was coming fast. The shadows at the cottonwoods did not retreat. The gate creaked, not from wind this time, but from a careful hand. The woman drew a long breath and said a prayer without words. The door latch gave a small click behind her, and a voice she did not recognize spoke low from inside the house as the front steps took a weight they had never carried before. Rain hammered the porch roof, and the night seemed to lean closer around the small ranch house. The woman stood frozen, her breath shallow, the rifle cold against her palms. The voice behind her was calm but low, the kind that made blood turn heavy in the veins. "Put it down, ma'am," it said. "Wouldn't want you to make a mistake you can't take back." She turned slowly, her eyes narrowing. The man standing in the doorway was tall, his coat dripping wet, a dark bandana tied at his throat. She'd seen him once before in town, at the feed store, talking to the card dealer who watched her that night by the schoolhouse. He took a step inside, boots leaving muddy prints on the floor. "We don't mean you harm," he said, though his hand rested near the pistol at his side. "Just need a word with your husband," she steadied her voice. "He's not here. He's gone to town." The man smiled thinly. "We know. That's why we came now." Lightning cracked outside, flooding the room with blue light. She saw another shadow move by the window, another man watching. Her heart pounded so loud she thought they might hear it. "You'd best leave," she said, raising the rifle higher. "There's nothing here for you." The man's eyes flicked toward the mantel, where the locket and letters rested. "There's more here than you think," he said softly. "Your husband's been owing a debt. To folks who don't forget easy. Those steers missing from the range, that's payment he thought he could hide." Her throat went dry. "You're lying," she said, though part of her feared it wasn't a lie. The man stepped closer. "Maybe, maybe not, but I'm here to take what's owed before others come who ain't so polite." His boots creaked against the floorboards. "Now where's the key to the strongbox?" She didn't move. The rifle trembled, but her hands held firm. "You'll find nothing but tools and Bible pages here," she said. "We've got no silver, no savings, and no place for thieves." He studied her, amused by her defiance. "I admire your spirit," he said, tilting his head. "Shame it's wasted on a man who's brought this on himself." Outside, thunder rolled again, and through it came the faint sound of hooves. The man's expression hardened. "He's early," he muttered. "Boys, outside." The second shadow slipped from the window and the first man turned to her once more. "Stay quiet, lady. I got no wish to harm you." He vanished into the rain as she stood trembling by the door. For a moment, all she could hear was the storm, wind shrieking through the eaves, the foal's frightened cry from the barn. Then the gunfire started. One shot, then two more echoing across the fields. She dropped to her knees, crawling toward the window. In the distance, she saw muzzle flashes, brief bursts of orange against the dark. Her husband's horse cut through the rain, charging hard, and she could see him leaning low in the saddle, firing as he rode. Her breath caught as one of the attackers fell, rolling into the mud. Another fled toward the trees. The man on horseback dismounted before the porch, shouting her name. She threw open the door, heart racing as he staggered inside, rain streaming off his hat. His coat was torn at the shoulder, but he was still breathing hard, eyes wild. "You all right?" he asked, gripping her arm. "They came for you," she said. "Said you owed them. Said the missing cattle were payment." He swore under his breath, glancing toward the window. "That's half true. I did owe them, but not money. I owed them peace. I caught them rustling on church land months ago and ran them off. They didn't forgive." A sound outside cut him short, the slow crunch of boots approaching the porch again. He motioned for her to douse the lamp. The room fell into shadow, only lightning lighting their faces. The front door creaked, and the handle turned. He pushed her behind the table, rifle ready. When the door opened, the card dealer stepped in, hat low, eyes cold. "You made a mess tonight," he said, voice slick with menace. "3 men gone, and for what? You think this ranch worth dying over?" The cowboy raised his rifle, steady. "I think it's worth something you wouldn't understand." The dealer smiled faintly. "She's the reason, ain't she? Old bride with fire in her eyes. The town says you pitied her, but I see it now. You found something to fight for again." He took one step too close. The cowboy fired. The shot tore through the air, slamming into the man's shoulder. The dealer stumbled back, hitting the porch rail. "You'll regret that," he hissed, clutching his arm before disappearing into the storm. The silence that followed felt heavier than the gunfire. The woman exhaled shakily, lowering her rifle. "He'll bring more," she said. "They won't stop now." He nodded grimly. "Then we won't run. But we'll be ready." They spent the rest of the night preparing. He barricaded the barn doors, refilled cartridges, and patched his torn coat while she gathered candles and bandages. Neither spoke of fear, but both felt it pressing close. She wanted to ask if what the man had said was true, if he'd been living with this danger all along. But she saw the shame in his eyes and let it rest for now. By dawn, the rain had eased, but the sky stayed gray and heavy. The road from town would be muddy for miles, and no sheriff could come fast enough. She stood by the window, watching the horizon. "They'll come before dark," he said quietly, tightening the saddle on his horse. "They always come when the sun's low." She turned to him. "Then let them find 2 people ready, not one afraid." He looked at her for a long moment, as though seeing her anew. "You're a brave woman," he said. "Braver than I ever deserved." "I'm just tired of losing what's worth keeping," she replied. He smiled faintly, then rode out to set traps along the ridge. Alone in the house, she swept the floors, lit a small fire, and said a prayer under her breath. But when she reached for the rifle again, she found her hand steady now, not shaking. Hours passed. The light began to fade. The valley lay hushed, as if waiting for something. Then came the distant sound of hooves, slow, deliberate, not rushing but approaching with purpose. She moved to the window, heart pounding. 6 riders this time, spreading wide as they neared the house. Her husband was still out there. She hurried to the barn to warn him, the cold biting through her shawl. The foal neighed softly, restless. "Hush," she whispered. "We'll be fine." But when she stepped into the open yard, she saw one of the riders already waiting near the well, a shotgun across his lap. He smiled thinly when their eyes met. "Don't run, ma'am," he said. "No sense in that." Before she could answer, a single shot cracked from the ridge. The man by the well dropped where he stood. The sound echoed across the field. The rest of the riders scattered, ducking for cover. The battle had begun. Her husband rode hard from the hills, firing as he came. 2 horses veered off into the brush. One bullet struck the corner of the barn, splintering the wood near her head. She ducked behind a trough, gripping the rifle tight. Smoke and thunder filled the air again, the kind of chaos that blotted out thought. When she rose to aim, she saw her husband pinned behind a wagon, returning fire. Then, across the yard, the card dealer appeared again. His arm bound in cloth, his face twisted with fury. He shouted something she couldn't hear over the wind, then raised his pistol toward the wagon. Without thinking, she fired. The recoil kicked against her shoulder, and the bullet struck the dirt near his feet. He spun, firing back. The blast tore through the corner post beside her. She ducked again, gasping for air. Her husband called her name. Stay low! But she saw him glance toward her, and in that split second one of the riders took aim at his exposed side. She screamed a warning and fired again, hitting the attacker square in the chest. The man dropped, his gun falling from his grasp. Her husband turned toward her, stunned. "You saved my life," he shouted through the smoke. The words barely reached her before another shot rang out. Closer this time. The card dealer was moving toward the porch, dragging his wounded leg, firing blindly as he advanced. The cowboy dashed from behind the wagon, tackling him hard to the ground. The two men struggled, rolling in the mud, their weapons scattering. She ran forward, desperate to help, her skirts heavy with rain and dirt. Lightning flashed again, revealing their faces twisted in rage and exhaustion. The dealer grabbed a knife from his belt and swung. The cowboy caught his wrist, forcing it down, but the blade grazed his arm, blood mixing with the rain. She lifted the rifle but couldn't get a clear shot. The storm howled around them, drowning every word. Then from the far edge of the yard another rider appeared, one she hadn't seen before, cloaked and silent, rifle raised. The shot fired once, echoing like thunder, but she couldn't tell where it struck. The dealer went still. The cowboy pushed him off, panting, and turned toward the ridge, eyes wide. The cloaked figure lowered the gun and began to ride closer through the mist. The woman's hands trembled as she raised her rifle again, unsure if the danger was over or just beginning. The horse stopped near the gate, and the figure dismounted slowly. The rain slid off the cloak, revealing the face beneath, the face from the old photograph that had once been kept in the drawer with the letters. He froze where he stood, and the woman's heart stopped. It was the sister of his first wife. For a long moment no one moved. Rain fell between them like a curtain, washing the blood and mud from the yard. The woman stood by the porch, the rifle still raised though her hands had begun to shake. Her husband stared toward the figure near the gate, unable to trust what his eyes were seeing. The rider pushed back her hood, and the truth settled like thunder after lightning. It was indeed her, the sister of the woman he had once loved and buried. Her face, though older now, still carried the same sharp features and storm-gray eyes. She looked at the chaos before her, the fallen men, the smoking rifles, the wounded ground, and then at him. "You've made quite a mess," she said, her voice cold but trembling beneath the surface. "I told you your past would come back one day." He stepped forward slowly, lowering his rifle. "You shouldn't have come," he said quietly. "You don't belong in this, don't I?" she replied, eyes narrowing. "It was my sister you brought here, my sister you buried here. I came to see what kind of life she died for. And what I find is you married again, to another woman left out in the cold." The woman on the porch lowered her weapon and took a cautious step forward. "You came in time to save him," she said, her tone soft but steady. "Whoever you are, I'm grateful for that." The sister's gaze turned toward her, studying her from head to toe. "So you're the one," she said. "The town said he took pity on you." "I don't need pity," the woman replied. "Only peace. And that's what we were trying to keep tonight." Something in her calmness seemed to soften the hard lines on the sister's face. She glanced back toward the lifeless body of the card dealer lying near the barn. "Those men were after me once," she said quietly. "After my land. I thought you'd sent them." The cowboy shook his head. "I ran them off months ago. They came back for revenge, not for you." Silence hung between them, heavy with misunderstanding and the ghosts of too many years. The sister dismounted, mud clinging to her boots, and knelt beside the fallen. "They were fools," she said. "But fools like this spread faster than weeds." He nodded slowly. "The sheriff will be here by morning. We'll tell him what happened." The sister stood and turned back toward the couple. "You two should leave this place," she said. "This land brings more sorrow than it's worth." The woman shook her head. "Maybe it did once, but sorrow doesn't own it anymore." The wind quieted, and for the first time since the storm began, the sky started to break. The clouds drifted apart, letting a thin band of dawnlight spill across the hills. The sister looked at the light, then at the man she once blamed for her sister's death. "You always did believe the land could forgive," she said. "Maybe it's time I try to do the same." He met her eyes, voice low. "I never meant for her to suffer. I loved her more than I knew how to show." "I know," she said. "And maybe that's what hurt the most." She turned back to her horse, adjusting the saddle strap with trembling hands. Before climbing on, she looked once more toward the woman standing by the porch. "Take care of him," she said. "He's good at hiding pain until it burns through everything near him." "I already learned that," the woman answered. When the sister rode away, her silhouette faded into the thinning mist. The rain stopped. The only sound left was the wind moving through the cottonwoods. The cowboy and his wife spent the rest of the morning tending to what the storm and fight had left behind. They buried the fallen men on the edge of the property, near the ridge where the grass grew high. The sheriff arrived by midday, weary from the ride but satisfied with the truth. He asked few questions, seeing enough in their eyes to know the story wasn't one of vengeance but survival. When the sheriff left, promising to close the case, the ranch finally fell quiet again. The woman walked down to the creek, washing the mud from her hands. The water was cold but clean, carrying away the dark stains from the night before. She looked up at the hills where the foal now hobbled beside its mother, stronger than before. For the first time since arriving at the station weeks ago, she felt like she truly belonged. Inside the house, her husband sat by the fire, his bandaged arm resting against his chest. The letters and the locket lay on the table, untouched. When she entered, he lifted his head. "I should have told you everything from the start," he said. "About the letters, about her sister, about what happened to my first wife. She got sick during the winter. We almost lost the herd. I tried to ride for the doctor, but the storm caught me halfway back. By the time I reached home, she was gone. Her sister never forgave me for not saving her." The woman sat beside him, her hand finding his. "You did what you could," she said. "We all live with ghosts, but we can choose which ones we keep." He looked into the fire for a long while, then nodded. "You're not afraid to speak truth, are you?" "Fear doesn't help much when you've already been left behind once," she said gently. "It teaches you to stand instead." He smiled faintly, then reached across the table and took the locket. He opened it, staring at the small portrait inside, then closed it again and placed it on the mantel beside the Bible. "Let her rest now," he said, "and let this house breathe again." Days passed and the land began to heal. The rain brought green shoots up through the earth and the creek ran clear again. The woman tended her garden, and the scent of lavender returned to the air. The man repaired the barn roof, sometimes stopping to watch her from afar with quiet gratitude. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky burned orange, he joined her by the garden fence. "You could have left after that night," he said softly. "No one would have blamed you," she smiled, brushing dirt from her hands. "And go where? The station's still empty and I've already built roots here. This land may have started with sorrow, but it's growing something better now." He nodded, looking out over the hills. "Maybe we both needed one last storm to learn what peace feels like." The foal nuzzled her hand, playful and steady on its once weak leg. She laughed, the sound carrying across the open field. He looked at her then, the woman the town once called too old to be chosen, too plain to be loved, and realized she had become the strength he'd forgotten to believe in. Later that night, when the stars came out bright and countless above them, they sat together on the porch, listening to the wind hum through the grass. "It's strange," she said quietly. "I used to think my life had ended before I even started. But sometimes God waits until a person's near the end before giving them a real beginning." He looked at her, the lines of hardship softened by the glow of the lantern. "You've given this place a heart again," he said. "And you've given me one too." She smiled, resting her head lightly against his shoulder. "Then let's promise not to lose it again." He nodded, and they sat there until the night turned cold, their hands clasped, the sound of the land stretching peaceful and wide around them. The war with the rustlers had ended, the debts buried with the dead, and the whispers in town soon turned from mockery to quiet respect. In the months that followed, the garden flourished, and travelers passing by the station spoke of the ranch with warmth. They said the widower who once lived alone had found a wife who worked harder than the wind itself, and that the two had built something that outlasted sorrow. The preacher, when he rode by, often said their story was proof that second chances came to those who met grace halfway. By winter's first snow, the house stood brighter than before, its porch mended, its windows shining from her careful hands. The land no longer felt haunted but alive. The foal had grown strong, running with the herd across the valley, and at night, when they heard its hooves beating the earth, they felt it like a promise that every wound, no matter how deep, could find a way to heal. One morning, as dawn rose quiet over the ridges, the woman watched her husband hitch the wagon. He looked back at her, the same rough man but changed in ways words couldn't say. She walked toward him, tucking his scarf into place, and smiled. "Where are you headed?" "Just to town," he said. "Got to settle something with the bank," she laughed softly. "You mean buy more seed?" Maybe that too, he said, touching the brim of his hat. We've got good land here. Would be a shame not to fill it with life. As he rode away, she stood on the porch, her shawl fluttering in the morning wind. The sky above the valley was wide and endless, like a clean page waiting for a new story. And as the sun climbed higher, casting gold over the ranch that had once been only dust and grief, she whispered a quiet thanks to fate, to love, and to the strength that comes when two weary souls decide to begin again.